Big shout out and props to Liquid Death for sponsoring this episode. You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello everyone, you are listening to We Saw the Devil. This is Robin, and today's episode is going to be focusing on 10 different cases that have been making their way through this week's news cycle, this week and last week. So much is actually happening in the world right now in terms of true crime, murder, and mayhem. So we are going to touch on a few of these items that I personally find most interesting. Everything from Josh Duggar, of course, Love Has Won, Suzanne Morphew, and others. So that is what today's episode will be focusing on. I did publish a really quick 9-minute Lori Vallow update episode last week. If you missed that, just quick news, grand jury. Apparently, Tammy Daybell, JJ Vallow, and Tylee Ryan's cases have been tied together, and there is a grand jury that's being called. So huge news in the Lori Vallow case. Hopefully we're seeing forward motion of that. If you're interested in what a grand jury is, what it entails, what it's going to look like in terms of the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell cases, feel free to check out the last episode. It's only 9 minutes long. And you may already know what a grand jury is, but here is your quick refresher. Before we get into today's episode, don't forget you can find us at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil across all social media outlets. Also, if you love the show and want to financially back it and in return receive monthly benefits for as little as $3 a month, you can check us out on Patreon. That's patreon.com/We Saw the Devil. I would like to do movie nights, game nights, things like that. So definitely, if you are interested in backing us, check us out there. And finally, titty slap that subscribe button. If you're enjoying the show and haven't yet, think you may want to hear more, slap it. We have a lot of cool content scheduled for the future. Again, I keep talking about it, but we have been working with Rising Against Love Has Won to do a full series on Love Has Won. Basically from its origin stories, all the way to how did we end up here. So you will not want to miss that. And furthermore, if you're digging the show, leave a 5-star review. I heard it best described as if you don't quite want to support on Patreon, these are free episodes, and just taking a few minutes to leave a 5-star review for a podcast, it's almost like paying for free content. It really actually means the world to us in terms of marketing and metrics and statistics and things like that and sponsorship. Please, if you can find it in your heart to do so, leave us a review. That's about all I have for that, guys. Happy Monday. Well, I guess happy Tuesday now. I'm recording this currently Monday night, so it'll be happy Tuesday by the time you guys start listening to this. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. Happy Mother's Day. Thank you to all of the kind comments that came out to me for Mother's Day. It was really, really, really heartwarming considering everything that's happened this year. It was really sweet. So I hope all of you had a wonderful weekend. So first, I want to know what you guys are watching. It seems like this is the golden era currently for true crime TV. So much stuff is coming out. A couple pieces we will actually be discussing on this episode, but I want to know what you are watching. I haven't personally had a lot of time to devote to TV and watch TV series. I currently am trying to finish up season 2 of The Boys, which is one of my favorite shows. And sadly, well, not sadly, you know what? I'm proud of it. I am proud to like trash TV at times. And I have watched a marvel on Discovery Plus. It is called Pig Royalty. And I have to tell you guys that I've never given thought to the fact that there could be pig shows in the southwestern United States. But there is. And Pig Royalty is basically a reality show that is highly scripted, like they all are, but it documents two rival families in like southern Texas who do pig shows. And it is hilarious. So tell me what you guys are watching. There's so much true crime all over the place. I need some recommendations. So feel free. You can email it to info@WeSawTheDevil, drop it on our social media. But I want to know what you guys are currently watching. So let's get into it, and let's start with Love Has Won. Also, if I sound a little extra hoarse today, I do apologize. It has been storming nonstop, raining a lot here in Tennessee, and my sinuses, I guess everything's getting stirred up, and I just sound like an 80-year-old woman. So I apologize for the extra gravel today, but hanging on by a thread, guys. So let's start with Love Has Won. There have been so many insane details coming out about this case, and I will actually be holding off on discussing the history of it and giving more context to Love Has Won as a whole, because that series that we're doing is coming out soon. However, let's touch on a few key pieces that have surfaced this over the last week. First and foremost, guys, I want to say, so Jackie and I covered this case 11 months ago. And the reason I know this is because we published the episode up to YouTube, and a bunch of people, I guess due to the news and it being like a really popular news item, are commenting and coming across that episode. I have to say, sitting down and thinking about that group, I never in a million years thought that we would end up here. As you know, we've covered a variety of different cults on this show, and a lot of them end up in the same way, right? Suicide pact, or, something, or they kick out their leader, or they die or get murdered. I mean, it's the theme is ongoing, right? But for some reason, I thought that Love Has Won was different. I mean, I guess I'm kind of, wow, I totally just solved the problem of my dating life, because if my intuition is this horrible, I mean, it all is starting to basically make sense. But I digress. Yeah, I didn't see this coming. I thought that this one was a little bit more benign, if that's possible. I mean, the group is terrible. They brainwash, they physically, there have been reports of also sexual abuse and coercion in their groups. But, as far as something like this, I didn't see it coming. So here's the chain of events. The owner of the Love Has Won house in Colorado apparently called police because some other members showed up with a corpse in their car, with a corpse of Amy Carlson, and she was partially decomposed. So the police show up, and then they find Amy Carlson, Mother God, as it were, partially decomposed, wrapped in a sleeping bag, and the sleeping bag was on top of a bed, almost like a makeshift shrine. The sleeping bag, which contained her body, was wrapped in Christmas lights. So apparently they unwrapped that gift and discovered her corpse. Her eyes were missing, and someone had applied glitter makeup to where her eyes should be. Like, what? It's completely unbelievable. I never in a million years thought that we would be here with this case. Seeing her on Dr. Phil, her family pleading for her return, it just felt like there was enough there that somehow she would be coming back to reality. But then you see pictures from their live stream and different groups, and you saw how she was devolving, how she was losing weight, becoming skinny. And if you've looked over the last couple years, you just see the evolution of Amy and how addiction and whatnot has just made her deteriorate to the point of death. So currently where it stands is that after the police showed up and they found her, 7 members were arrested for abuse of a corpse. We also have some additional charges related to there being a teenager and a small child there in the house as well. Apparently, 5 of the members drove the body from California to Colorado. Reports are varied, based on current and former members, but apparently they were asking for donations and kind of like weekend at Bernieing her along the way. It's all very, very, very disturbing. So currently, cause of death has not been released. At the press conference, they said that it doesn't appear to be foul play, and we are currently waiting on an autopsy. So that is basically the current status of Love Has Won. definitely waiting on the autopsy. Her son, there have been a series of press releases, press conferences, as well as Amy's oldest son coming out and doing an interview. And it's just so sad because Amy walked away from her children like 10 years ago. So he hasn't essentially had a mother. And he's like, yep, well, it's pretty disturbing. Yeah, I mean, they're a cult. What do you expect? I mean, it's just really, really incredibly sad how her own son, she abandoned. And then now in her death, he's just, well, is what it is. It's just incredibly sad. And it was shocking to me that, I was like, oh, wow, will this cult will fizzle out? Or, I just don't really see it going anywhere. And then, boom, found wrapped in Christmas lights, eyeless. It's just not something that I expected. And I'm not trying to sound loose or disrespectful about this. It is heinously sad any way you look at it. But don't forget that at its core, this was still a very, very, very harmful group that did abuse emotionally, physically, and sexually, and financially, if you want to really think about it, many people. Hey guys, it's Robin. If there's one thing you don't know about me, it's that I'm one thirsty bitch. I've tried drinking from every vessel you can imagine, and I've learned the hard way that there's only one thing that can quench this wench: liquid death. It's not bottled water. It's water with an aluminum can-do attitude. Aluminum can be recycled over and over again, which means that it doesn't have to end up in a landfill or the ocean, unlike plastic. Some bottled water tastes like it came from a porcelain bowl, and trust me, I'd know. But that's not the case with liquid death. Their water comes from a deep underground mountain source protected by a few 100 feet of stone. Then it's purified and placed into airtight aluminum cans. And let me tell ya, this water is wet. And it gets better. Every time you crack open a cold can of liquid death, you're putting money in the pockets of nonprofits that are trying to kill plastic pollution. So if you have a hankering for some H2O and you want to give the middle finger to landfills, take it from this previously parched person and head over to liquiddeath.com and use the code WeSawTheDevil at checkout for a free koozie 2-pack on your first 12-pack purchase. Again, head over to liquiddeath.com, use our code WeSawTheDevil at checkout to get a free koozie 2-pack on your first 12-pack purchase. You can also murder your thirst at Whole Foods Market, 7-Eleven, or Sprouts Farmers Market and buy yourself the wettest canned water in the game. Liquid death. In news that will surprise no one, Barry Morphew was arrested in the death of his wife, Suzanne Morphew. The charges are first-degree murder, tampering with physical evidence, and attempting to influence a public servant. Barry is now in custody in his county's detention center. We do not know at the moment what development led to the arrest or what evidence the DA has. The affidavit outlining all of it, like all the evidence they had against him, has been sealed. All we know is that he has been arrested. For those of you not familiar, just to recap, Suzanne Morphew is 49 years old. She disappeared last year on Mother's Day in the Salida area near her home in Colorado. She supposedly went for a solo bike ride near her home, but never returned. So her bike and a, quote, personal item were recovered, but she has never been found. Barry Morphew, her husband, like so many others, maintained his innocence throughout the entire ordeal. However, cracks started to show, and a lot of people, even behavioral and analysts, came out and they're like, yeah, he's shady. He had some really, really bizarre behaviors. Now, that took place both before and after Suzanne's disappearance. He has like a construction company, a cement company. He was popping up at job sites in the middle of the night, which made absolutely no sense. And then he put out that really bizarre, piss poor video where he begged for her return. He showed very little emotion. Body language experts have just absolutely shredded that video because it just makes no sense. The sad part in this case is that Suzanne left behind 2 adult daughters, and they have now both lost their parents. The Suzanne Morphew case, at this juncture, we all knew what the outcome of it was. And we all knew, I mean, I hate to say it, guys, and I know there are already t-shirts made about it, but if a wife goes missing, it's almost always the husband at this point. Like, I actually want to see statistics on married women who go missing and what the percentage is of, like, their husband being responsible for their murder. So next up on my list, we head to Florida, because Florida is the gift that keeps on giving, especially in this particular case. Emily Rose Grover and her mother, Laura Rose Carroll, were arrested back in March after it was found that they had hacked into the Tate High School student portal to ensure that Emily was elected homecoming queen. The reason why it's in the news this week is that Emily was just 17 when she was arrested, but in April, she turned 18, the magic number in our legal system. So she is now being charged as an adult. Now, her mom was an assistant principal at a nearby school and had access to the student information system, basically known as Focus. Focus is the name of the portal. And Laura decided to switch 117 votes to her daughter's favor. So the votes were flagged as fraudulent, and investigators noticed that they came from her personal IP address. From a press release, quote, agents uncovered evidence of unauthorized access to Focus linked to Carroll's cell phone, as well as computers associated with their residence, with a total of 246 votes cast for homecoming court. Multiple students reported that the daughter described using her mother's Focus account to cast votes. The investigation also found that beginning August 2019, Carroll's Focus account accessed 372 high school records, and 339 of those were Tate High School students. The kicker in this is that both women, both Emily and Laura, now face up to 16 years in prison. Again, years in prison. And currently they're both freed on $2,000 and $6,000 bonds, respectively. Now, question for you listeners. What do you think? Let's think about this from Emily's perspective. Let's think about Emily first. Emily was a student. She wanted to win homecoming queen. I mean, Pride Month is next month. Couldn't she have just waited a couple months to become a queen? And before you get offended, I am a member of the LGBT community, and I can say that. Emily is now facing 16 years in prison. What do you think? Do you think that that is a fair outcome to a 17-year-old girl who was dumb and wanted to become homecoming queen? On the opposite end of that spectrum, let's talk about her mom. So her mom, Laura, was an assistant principal at a nearby school. She accessed almost 400 different students' accounts. I want to know, was she able, or did she change grades? Did she make changes? She is in a supervisory position, assistant principal. The outcome of that, depending, she could have ruined lives. So I don't know. I kind of want some more information to come out about this particular case to see what happened. But when Brock Turner and a bunch of other criminals can rape women and leave them unconscious behind a dumpster and get 6 months and then out on their way. I just find 16 years for changing a couple votes to be a little backwards, if you get my drift. I guess only time will tell. I personally don't think that they are going to be sentenced to 16 years, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Alrighty, case number 4, guys, out of Maryland. We are moving on to Maryland. And I love this. Actually, don't you love when you come across a headline and you just laugh? So 47-year-old Gail Metwally in Maryland set her home on fire and then sat in the front yard in a lawn chair while she watched it burn. Now, the more serious element to this one is that she had 3 roommates. Apparently, they did not get along very well, and I am assuming now also that they are previous roommates. At that time, only one housemate was home. And how do we know only one housemate was home? Because the neighbors heard her screaming. Apparently, Miss Gail walked around the perimeter of her home with a gasoline can and sloshed gasoline all around it, as well as inside of it, and then lit a match, came outside, sat her ass down in a lawn chair, and just smiled, cackled, and watched it burn. So roommate was in the basement at the time and started screaming. Her neighbors apparently heard this and then came over and rescued her. Bystanders rescued that roommate from the basement. At that point, Gail apparently ran down the road and police were able to easily arrest her. If you are looking for a little piece of comedy and comic relief there, her mugshot is perfection. I just feel like we're missing someone to put that into a meme. Like, we need a meme of this. Moving on to number 5, we have the killing of Mary Catherine Edwards from 1995. Don't you guys love it when cold cases get solved? I mean, that's like my kink, right? Is when a cold case has been solved and justice is likely going to prevail. So in the case of Mary Catherine Edwards, she was murdered in 1995. No information, no suspect, nothing. She was found raped, handcuffed, and strangled in the bathroom of her home. Turns out the killer was familiar. His name was Clayton Bernard Foreman. He and Mary Catherine went to high school together. They were pretty close friends. Friends to the point where Mary Catherine actually was in his first wedding. Apparently, Clayton was into her. She rebuked his advances. And then they basically fell out of touch. The background on what exactly happened between the two of them is very sketchy. What we do know is that Clayton actually raped one of their classmates. Later on in the years, he saw her standing at a gas station. It was raining. He offered to take her home. She knew him, so she agreed, and he pulled the car over. He did the same thing. He handcuffed her with her hands behind her back, sexually assaulted her, and then let her go, though. Same MO. And what happened, again, DNA prevails, guys. They had the DNA from Mary Catherine's crime scene, and DNA prevailed yet again, and his extended relatives started popping up in the system. They finally pinpointed Clayton as a suspect, and then they had a sting. They pulled some trash out of his trash can, and DNA matched. So therefore, Mary Catherine Edwards and her family will now have justice after she was brutally murdered in 1995. Moving back to Florida, this is breaking news as of today. There's a very sad ending to a case out of Florida. The body of 13-year-old Tristan Bailey, who had been missing since Mother's Day yesterday, 2 days ago for all of you listeners now, was discovered in the Jacksonville area. And what makes this case worse is that another child was charged with second-degree murder. 14-year-old Aiden Fucci was arrested. Currently, there is no information available as to cause of death, her injuries, or even how the two knew each other. The only thing available is that her body was in fact found fully clothed and that there are multiple crime scenes that are being investigated. So let's move to New York. An upstate New York man has admitted to murdering a sub shop worker. James Duffy just took a plea deal in the murder of Elizabeth Lamont. Basically, what happened is that Elizabeth wasn't getting paid. James and Elizabeth were co-workers at a sandwich shop, at a Subway shop. Apparently, Elizabeth wasn't getting paid correctly, so she was going to the labor board and reporting that she wasn't getting the money that she was owed. The owner, Georgios Kakavalos, basically talked to his employee, James, and they plotted her murder. James apparently murdered her with a baseball bat. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Duffy finally just reached a plea deal in the case and has been singing like a bird. Apparently, they have been plotting her murder for 3 days. Kakavalos said that basically she was causing problems for the labor board, and he is singing and singing and singing. Apparently, he hit her over the head with a baseball bat, murdered her, and then dumped her body in a marshy area. Now, Duffy, he initially pleaded not guilty, so he ended up taking this plea deal to basically avoid the life sentence without parole, because that is a possibility there. Kakavalos, the owner of this sub shop, is possibly going to receive 18 years to life. Now, his sentencing is actually in 2 months in July. Either way, it's very, 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 very sad. And for all of you business owners out there, just pay your employees what you owe them. Like, going to prison for life over killing your employee is going to be a little bit bigger of a drag than just paying them the fucking money that you owe them. Life tip there. Now let's head down to Texas for some TV news. Elizabeth Olsen is going to be playing axe murderer extraordinaire Candy Montgomery. Now, Candy had been having an affair with her friend Betty's husband, Alan. The affair had apparently been going on for quite a while, and Betty found out about it. Well, Candy apparently went to Betty's home, and Betty confronted Candy about the affair. Candy claims that Betty got an axe and came towards her to attack her with the axe. Candy said that in a struggle, she actually gained control and took the axe. She killed Betty with 41 blows of the axe. Now, the interesting part about this case is that Candy was acquitted by a jury and walked out of the courtroom. And the interesting part is in the trial, the state said, okay, well, Candace Montgomery murdered Betty Gore. And the defense team is like, yep, that's true. That definitely happened. And the reasoning behind it is, self-defense, but they had a bunch of psychiatrists come in and testify that Betty Gore made a remark, some type of comment during the fight. Actually, I believe it was shh. Supposedly, that triggered a repressed memory from when Candy was 4 years old and basically caused her to just go to town axing Betty's face. 41 blows of an axe. The jury ended up acquitting Candy Montgomery in less than 5 hours. And what I find so fascinating is that when I read about the case, the number one thing that kind of pops up for me, I guess, my issue is the number of wounds. 41 blows with an axe. Guys, you can imagine, right? You can imagine what that would look like. But in an interview with a juror, she said, quote, "We determined it never had a bearing on the verdict at all, whether it was 1 gunshot or 1,000 whacks." I do think Elizabeth Olsen is an incredible actress. She's actually been in a couple of my favorite films, so it's going to be interesting to see how this comes out. There was a 1984 book about it called Evidence of Love, and they actually did make a 1990 television movie on it. I couldn't find proof of whether it was a Lifetime Movie Network film or not. It's a really interesting case, and I definitely hope that you guys stay up to date and watch that, because Candy is still alive. She's now 71, and she lives in rural Georgia. I wonder if she's going to be watching it. I love good, interesting trials. And apparently in this case, you can whack someone 41 times, literally just completely destroy their head and face, and be like, well, she told me to shh, and it triggered a repressed emotion, and you're acquitted. You walk right out. How nice. And last but not least, guys, let's talk about Josh Duggar for a moment. Josh Duggar, everyone's evangelical shitbag of the year. Because, oh my God, how worse can he get? So let's start with the present charges. So last week, he appeared in court on Zoom, basically in his child pornography case. For those of you who have somehow missed it, an agent from the Department of Homeland Security basically found and said that Josh Duggar's computer had more than 200 images involving naked minors and child sex abuse material. Some of the children in these photos and videos were as young as 5 years old. Josh's defense team asked if there's evidence that Josh had been actually looking at it and finding it, or if he just possessed it. Apparently, the agents hadn't actually seen Josh directly checking out child porn. Okay, so apparently that's going to be his defense. I don't know how that going on there. Okay, let's talk reality here. Josh had a laptop. Now, apparently he has had a crippling porn addiction for some time. That was made public a couple years ago, and we're going to go through his previous issues. But apparently he had a laptop. He had a secondary hard drive that was locked down that only forensics agents could basically access. The first drive was the public one, and he had something on his computer. It's a form of screen accountability software is what it's called. And basically it's more or less kind of like a plugin or like a framework that you put on your computer. And if you try to access something that you're not supposed to, it actually notifies basically your partner, your mentor, the person who you want to be held accountable to. In Josh's case, it was his wife, Ylana Duggar. Yeah, so apparently his porn addiction was so crippling, he put Covenant Eyes on his computer so that if he ever tried to access porn, it would notify his wife so he could be held accountable. Here's the kicker though. On this computer, that side was clear and clean. On his second hard drive that he had a Tor browser so that he could access the deep/dark web. He had all of this child pornography content, and it was very clear that it was set up like it was his password. Also, the screensaver, like for this particular hard drive, actually had a picture of his family and children on it. And mind you, what's so disgusting is that Josh and Anna have 6 children, and Anna's actually pregnant. Their children are 5 months old, 3.5, 5.5, 7.5, 9.5, and 11. And he was looking at child porn of children who were the same age of his own children that he literally had on the desktop of his laptop, of that computer. And it's disgusting. So basically at his hearing last week, it was determined that he could be released from jail, but he's not allowed to go home. So he is going to be outfitted with basically one of those old-fashioned GPS ankle monitors, and he's going to go live with friends of the family of his parents. It's a pastor, a couple. He cannot have any contact with minors. He cannot possess any device that connects to the internet, but he can visit his own children as long as his wife Anna is there. Now let's talk about some other things that he's been involved in. This focus on the family piece of shit. So back in 2015 is when the big allegations rocked TLC. If you're not familiar, this family just can't stop reproducing. It's like a family of fucking rabbits, and they are on a show called 19 Kids and Counting. Josh was the eldest child. So in May of 2015, word came out that Josh had molested 5 girls between 2002 and 2003 when he was a teenager. Well, it turned out that 4 of the 5 victims were his own sisters. And what is so disgusting, and I just cannot fathom it, and unfortunately this happens so often in evangelical households, oh, well, it'll be okay. His parents put quote unquote safeguards into place. They locked all the doors. They got all their kids in bed. The girls went to the girls' room. The boys went into the boys' rooms, and they put locks on the doors. I'm thinking, that's literally all you got. You decided not to really get your son help, psychiatric care. You just locked them in separate rooms and did nothing. After that scandal, it set off another one. So in August of 2015, just a couple months later, the Ashley Madison scandal happened. And if you're not aware of what Ashley Madison is basically was a platform where if you want to have an affair, you can. You go, you sign up, and it basically connects you to other people who want to engage in an extramarital affair. Well, Ashley Madison was hacked. A bunch of celebrities got nailed on this. Josh Duggar was one of them. And he got nailed for being on Ashley Madison and cheating on his wife. Once again, he's like, I'm sorry, I have a porn addiction. And so he and his wife Anna apparently got treatment together and did some counseling. And supposedly that was from there. Then we have the next year. So the next year in 2016, a porn star named Danica Dillon said that Josh Duggar paid to have sex with her and then, quote, assaulted her to the point of causing her physical and emotional injuries. Josh ended up responding to the lawsuit on his own, denying that he even slept with her and claimed that he never even met her. Danica ended up dropping the lawsuit the following year. However, she said that it was because of threats, not because it didn't take place. In 2019, there was a real estate lawsuit. Josh and his company at the time, ALB Investments, were sued by a man for apparently purchasing a 5-acre property illegally. And then we have last month where he was booked for child pornography charges. I'm just so disgusted by it. And I think there is a sincere issue in this country amongst certain far right evangelical Christian groups. And before anyone gets their knickers in a twist, I am not talking down on Christianity in any way, shape, or form. I'm talking about these really, really, really small, far right, off the grid religious sects like the Duggars. The Duggars belong to this homeschooling community called the Institute of Basic Life Principles. the founder of, I'm going to call it IBLP from here on out, Bill Gothard, he was actually fired and kicked out of his own organization because 30 women came forward with allegations of rape and sexual misconduct. So Gothard was pretty much like thrown out into the wind. However, the Duggars still go almost every single year. In fact, when Josh Duggar was arrested last month, Jim Bob and Michele were actually in Big Sandy, Texas, getting ready to deliver a speech at the IBLP family conferences. And here's the thing, almost every single leader of IBLP has been accused of some sort of sexual misconduct. And I truly believe, and I'm willing to go out on a limb and also die on this hill, I truly believe that the theological beliefs of groups like this, basically like the complementarian gender roles, the purity cultures, the patriarchal structure of the men know everything, the women are quiet. All of that creates this dynamic in this power structure where it just breeds situations like this. It just breeds it. It is so much more common than one thinks. And yes, if you want to disagree with me, I can show you the statistics of sexual abuse in groups like these to back that up. And I'm sure if you live online at all, you have seen the graphic or the meme, the umbrella of protection. And this is directly from the IBLP's website. What is an umbrella of protection? It's the biblical principle of authority. So basically, the theme of this is that God has established significant jurisdictional structures. And the structure is as follows. You have Christ as the big umbrella, covering the husband, who covers his family, protects and provides for his family. The husband is over the wife, and the wife is over the children. So it's this entire linear structure of Christ, husband, wife, and then children. And in the book Growing Up Duggar, a memoir that was basically written by Jana, Jill, Jessa, and Ginger, they basically even talk about this, how growing up, their mom and dad, Jim, Bob, and Michele, basically told them that they had to respect their older siblings because they were their elders and they should treat them as such. And if anyone has watched any of the show whatsoever, or just taken a look or at any of the organizations they support, or any of their books, any of their just material whatsoever, they are very, 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 very much into the gender roles of men, head of house, and the women should be subservient to their husbands. The IBLP calls it points of obedience, where women need to be instant, cheerful, thorough, and unconditional. And in Michele and Jim Bob Duggar's memoir, 20 and Counting, they actually write that one of their parenting techniques is that they both together teach the children an obedience game from the time that they're really young. And yes, obedience game is a direct quote. And why did they do that? They said, quote, to make instantly obeying fun. So basically what they do is they will stand side by side and issue nonsensical instructions to the children. Say for the example in the book, Michele basically said that they told one child to stand on a tile square and scratch her head with her left hand and rub her tummy with her right hand while counting to 50. The children are required to respond, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, I'd be happy to, and then instantly complete the task. And these tasks include nonsensical ones, ridiculous ones, and even more, serious, benign ones like housework and things like that. And then let's get creepy. Also in her blog, Michele Duggar unfortunately has a blog very similar to The Transformed Housewife. If any of you guys want a really good laugh on that one, she's available on Facebook. So Michele Duggar basically said the best relationship advice she had ever received was from one of her friends because Michele was worried that Jim Bob was going to cheat on her. So Michele said her friend gave her the advice of, well, any woman can iron his shirt and make him lunch and food, but only you can provide him with sexual intimacy. And Michele was like, holy shit, that's right. So she encourages the readers of her blog to, quote, be available, and not just be available, but be joyfully available for their husband's sexual needs. She goes on to instruct her readers to say, yep, yes, sweetie, I'm here for you. No matter what, even though you may be exhausted and big and pregnant, you may not feel like he feels, but I'm still here for you and I'm going to meet your need because I know it's a need for you. IBLP teaches that women should not usurp or take over their husband's authority in any arenas. And their organization actually says on their website, quote, God grants spouses full access to each other's bodies for sexual gratification. And then we go back to the safeguards issue a moment ago, where Jim Bob and Michele, quote unquote, safeguarded their daughters from their brother, Josh, basically saying that they stopped any incestual molestation that was taking place. Michele told Megyn Kelly in an interview, quote, "We don't let boys babysit. There are just a lot of things we've put in place. You're not alone in a room with someone else, always be out visible, and little ones don't sit on big boys' laps or people that you don't know or even family members unless it's your daddy." And don't forget that Jim Bob literally said that, well, all he did was he's just curious about girls, so he went into their bedroom at night and touched them over their clothes. How dismissive can you be? Toxic and problematic. So not only are they not really taking care of the problem and calling out their child predator for being a child predator, a child predator, I guess, but they're pretty much saying, nope, we're just going to lock them under, key and basically indicate that pretty much like all men are going to do this. So we're just going to take care of it. I mean, it's just actually so incredibly toxic and damaging to that entire household, really, the boys and the girls. And as far as Josh Duggar, I hope he goes to prison for life. I'm actually kind of appalled that he's even allowed access to his own children, considering that he has female children along the same age of the children that he knowingly and sneakily accessed the dark web and deep web, outfitted his computer, installed his secondary hard drive. Like, he went all out in order to access this material. So that's it for news stories from this week, guys. There are 10 news stories that I have found interesting over this last week or so. Then I have some listener questions. I'm going to be answering 3 questions from you guys. Again, if you want to play along, if you have a question for me personally, my background, my interest in true crime, anything, feel free to email us at info@wesawthedevil.com. I love getting mail from you. The first question that I got is from Brittany, and she asks, if you could bring one serial killer back, who would it be? Without a doubt, I didn't even have to think about this. It just immediately came to me, is Israel Keyes. I find Israel Keyes to be utterly terrifying. I think a lot of people mention BTK because of the fact that he, blended in so well. He appeared to be so normal, although he was, extra controlling and a complete dick, but he just blended in. Israel Keyes, I feel, is the exact same. So many episodes, so many shows, documentaries, and material is available on him. But just to kind of recap all of that, he was from Alaska and he didn't kill locally. To put it very crassly, he didn't shit where he ate. He would fly all over the country and murder, kill, rob banks, so on and so forth. He was a carpenter in Alaska and he actually had a child. He and his first girlfriend, mother of his child, ended up breaking up. He had a child, he had a girlfriend, and he would travel frequently all over the country. He would pay in cash, and he would do his bidding in other states: New York, Vermont, Texas, Las Vegas, Washington State. And he was just absolutely terrifying. So in one particular case, it was in Vermont, he actually went there and he would actually buy a murder kit. He would buy a murder kit in cash. And no, you can't actually, get those pre-made. You have to build them yourselves, by the way. But he buried it and then he returned 2 years later to kill them. He took every precaution you can imagine. And no one knows the exact number of people that he killed. It seems like the FBI currently is aware of at least 11, but apparently they do believe that the number could be far, far larger. The only reason that he would caught is that I don't know if he gave up or what. He murdered a girl. He kidnapped a girl from a coffee stand and ended up taking her back to his home in his shed, raped and murdered her, and then flew down to the United States, rented a car, and took off using her credit card. And that is how he was caught. And when he was caught, he wasn't even surprised. He was one of the largest control freaks I've ever seen, read about. If you have some extra time, it is so fascinating to watch his police interviews, his jailhouse interrogations. I've never seen a worse monster. Like, if you've seen BTK's confession in court, how he has absolutely no emotion whatsoever as he talks about how he knew he was going to murder a woman, but gave her a pillow so she'd be more comfortable before it. Like, Israel Keyes is just so much worse. And so 100% Israel Keys. Next question is, what do you think is going to happen in the Lori Vallow case? In terms of the news last week, personally, for me, I do believe that a connection has been made between Chad and Lori and Tammy. I know people constantly ask me if I think that Lori Vallow is going to be tagged in on murder charges. And yes, I do. I don't think they're going to be able to separate Lori out of this. I think that Lori was completely involved in this, complicit in it, and I do believe that we are going to see murder charges for both her and Chad. And again, if you haven't listened to our last episode, it's just 9 minutes, and I basically explained the charge, the grand jury, what the grand jury is, and what to expect. The interesting part is that with this particular news, we don't know if the charges here are going to be against Chad or Lori or both. But it's going to be interesting, and I really do feel like we are going to see justice in this case. I really, truly, truly believe it. And lastly, last question, guys, is what's your favorite true crime documentary? I'm always looking for a new one. Hands down, my favorite true crime documentary is November 13, Attack on Paris. It chronicles the November 13th, 2015 attacks on Paris. I don't know if you guys remember that, but back in 2015, I don't know if you guys remember, but the Bataclan Theater, when terrorists stormed in with like AK-47s and took a bunch of hostages and concert goers and whatnot. I think a lot of people in America didn't quite realize exactly how bad these attacks were. The terrorists ended up killing 130 people that day, including 90 alone at the Bataclan. Over 416 people were injured, almost 100 of those critically, and 7 attackers were killed. The single night and series of attacks were the deadliest in France since World War II, and then also the deadliest in the entirety of the European Union since the Madrid, Spain bombings of 2004. And, you know, for those of you who follow France, I mean, God, I talk about France a lot, don't I? I guess it's the French degree in me. But if you recall, in like earlier that year in January, like way earlier that year, the attacks on the Charlie Hebdo offices, where terrorists forced themselves into the newspaper and then murdered, you know, workers and artists who worked for that huge newspaper. So if you are looking for a documentary, I cannot recommend this documentary enough. And not just because I'm a Francophile, but also just because it's so well done. This documentary actually interviews survivors who were there. The narration of it is just absolutely incredible. I cried through half of it. I mean, it is that visceral, that raw, and they really go in chronological order from the blast outside a soccer stadium to restaurants. Terrorists actually went into restaurants and shot them up, blew themselves up, like suicide bombings in restaurants. And then the Bataclan was like the grand finale that evening. I mean, there were like, I think 7 different locations of like 6 or 7 different locations for terror attacks that one evening. So it is just an incredible documentary. It's on Netflix. You can watch it on Netflix, and it is really, really, really good. There are 2 parts. The first part is basically interviews with survivors, the former French president, the former equivalent of like the French FBI. And yeah, it's just so, so good. And then the second part is basically picking up the pieces and kind of like love and light and all that kind of stuff. If you're looking for something to watch, I cannot recommend November 13, Attack on Paris enough. So that is it for today, guys. I have a lot of cool stuff coming up for you over the next couple weeks. Again, you can find us at WeSawTheDevil.com. If you have any questions, concerns, commentary, anything like that, you can email me at info@WeSawTheDevil. And if you are liking the show, loving the show, want to get some bennies, you can do that at patreon.com/WeSawTheDevil. And then finally, titty slap that subscribe button and leave a 5-star review if you are compelled to do so in your heart. It means the world to us and is actually very, very, very important. We're putting out free content, so a 5-star review goes a long way in terms of marketing, sponsorships, and things like that. The algorithm matters, guys. The algorithms matter. So that's it for today, guys. Until next crime.